Welcome back to the CreaTech stage at the CogX Hybrid Festival 2021, co-curated with the UK Creative Industries Council, a forum between government and industry, which brings together all sectors of the creative industries, from film to fashion, advertising to architecture, games to music, performance to publishing. You can find out more about us at thecreativeindustries.co.uk. I'm Janet Hull, and I lead the CreaTech programme for the Creative Industries Council. And I'm also Director of Marketing Strategy at the IPA. And it's my pleasure to be your MC for the afternoon. We've got a fantastic session coming up, a change of pace, called Designing Impact. It will talk about the future of sustainability and designing for social good in buildings, products and spaces that transform our everyday human experiences. A special welcome to Susan Boster, founder and managing director of Boster Group, an independent consultancy that creates strategic partnerships for corporations, cultural organizations, and artists. As a friend of CogX, she always brings to the stage the most interesting speakers. Just before Susan comes on stage herself, we're going to show a short video by way of introduction to her guests. Thank you.
We need to ask ourselves if the world around us is being made in our image, and if it isn't, whose image is it being made of, and how do we start to make our own? When people are excluded or when stories are erased, it's a ravage of culture. A whole generation of thought that could have evolved out of that. My biggest inspiration is Joburg for all of its energy, all of its challenges, and all of its opportunities. The softness that there is in the quality of light, which I think is something really special about the city. I spent big amounts of my childhood in my grandfather's store in inner city Joburg, and I vividly remember walking the streets of Joburg as a child and really being in love with it from a very young age. It is a place of so many other places, movements, cultures, and different forces. People have found ways to make the city home. I think it's a testament to how resilient people are. When we were invited to make a submission for the pavilion, I really wanted to reflect what someone like me from our context and from our part of the world could bring to this pavilion. And I think that's something that Joburg has given me, or something that I strive for in my work, is always trying to read beneath the surface. And I really wanted to reflect a London that is plural and that is about many different places, that honors voices from many different times, past, present, and future. The role of an architect is to be able to absorb, reflect, and translate who we are into the world. We need to be able to listen deeply to these silences and whispers. There's a whole set of worlds that are waiting to happen inside of them. I often think about our identities and how different the world looks from different perspectives. just slanted in a very particular worldview that is very limited. And so I think that understanding how our different ways of being manifest differently visually, and then starting to explore what that can mean for architecture. My ambitions around building are very much about reimagining structures so that they reflect who we are. And we need to do that now.
Welcome to Designing Impact. And first, a big thank you to the team at CogX for convening this year's digital hybrid event, safely celebrating our renewed ability to come together in person while keeping the event open and accessible to voices and audiences around the world. No matter who we are or what we do, part of getting the next 10 years right will require us to change our behavior. That means it's not just about inventing carbon efficient products, adopting circular policies, or applying diversity goals. It's about successfully impacting the decisions that billions of individuals make to encourage better outcomes for everyone. So ask any marketer, getting even a few thousand people to change their behavior can be a monumental task requiring millions of dollars of investment, but we know it can be done. And not just because we witnessed it happen overnight last year. How many of us changed our diets, our bank accounts, or our vote because we watched an incredible film, experienced a powerful artistic installation, or just found an app or product that made it easier? The recently gold medal, RIBA award-winning architect Sir David Adjaye once said that architecture is the physical act of social change and the manifestation of it. Now, at a critical time for our society and our planet, we, as a global community of business leaders, need to be thinking critically about the utility of art and design in our work and the social and environmental implications. The creative choices we make, from app to building design, leave an indelible footprint on audiences that has implications for public health, climate change, social justice, and more. By making those choices intentionally with aligned partners and key stakeholders, we can find ways to scale positive behavioral change and truly be on our way to getting the next 10 years right. I'm Susan Boster. I'm the founder and CEO of a boutique consultancy I set up 20 years ago. We put together partnerships between corporations, foundations, and institutions, and distinctively, we measure the financial and non-financial impact of these partnerships we put together. And one part of the value you can create is behavioral change in audiences, employees, or clients. Understanding how to optimize that is key. I'm joined today by a designer and an architect who put human behavior at the center of what they do to talk about what that means. So I want to start with introductions. First of all is Sumayya Vally. She's the founder of Counterspace Studio in Johannesburg. Sumayya's design, research, and pedagogical practice is committed to finding expression for hybrid identities and contested territories. In addition to being the architect of this year's pavilion at the Serpentine Gallery in London, which opened to the public just last week, she was named on this year's Time Magazine's 100 Leaders of the Futures list. Good afternoon, Sumayya.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for the warm and lovely introduction. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be speaking with you and also to be in conversation with Yves. So thank you for connecting us.
So great you're here. Yves Béhar is, well, I could say Silicon Valley based, I could say San Francisco based, or currently he's in Costa Rica based. He's the founder of fuseproject, which is an industrial design and branding firm that uses design to change people's lives, to pioneer positive social and environmental change, and to see over the horizon in order to create what's next and to invent new categories. he pioneered a model of partnership called venture design, wherein he becomes an equity partner in clients' businesses, and as such is co-founder of several successful startups. Thank you for joining us, Yves.
Thank you for having me, Susan and Sumayya. It's really fun to connect. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So glad you're here. And just as a shout out to Sir David Adjaye, he was the person that helped bring this all together as fans of both of yours and a dear friend of mine in Boster Groups. But let's get into the questions. Let's dive in. So while we accept the premise of this conversation that through art we can create behavioral change and thereby identify and accelerate the solutions of today's biggest global challenges, it feels like a natural start to our conversation by discussing how each of you knows this. In 2017, for example, Yves made the case that solving an important human problem is not only a function of design, but it's number one principle. So what to you, Yves, I'll start with you, is the role of design in creating behavioral change, and how do you reflect this in your work?
Well, we live in a century where new ideas are everywhere, but they're not just present; they're also critical to, I would say, even to all the way to our survival, to the survival of humankind, or the survival of nature around us. And so, for me, what I've been saying for a little while now is that design accelerates the adoption of new ideas. And these very critical 21st century ideas about sustainability, about equity, about access to technology at different stages of life, or in all around the world. I think these are sort of critical for our survival, and design can serve that. I mean, there's so many examples of a new idea that is launched and isn't launched right, doesn't have the right design, doesn't have the right connection, the right empathy towards the user, and it fails. And in a way, when that fails, it often sets the field back by years, sometimes a decade. And so it is both an opportunity for designers to accelerate the adoption of new ideas, but it's also a big responsibility.
Great. Thank you for that. And Sumayya, I mean, what to you is the role of architecture in creating behavioral change, and how do you reflect that in your work?
I think, Susan, thank you for the question, and Yves, also thank you for your reflections. So profound and powerful to hear them from you on this platform. If I always start by thinking or reflecting on how weaponized architecture has become, especially being from a context like Johannesburg that is so unequal by design. I think it's kind of embedded in my understanding of architecture that, for such a long time, we've seen in my context and in my own city, how much architecture shapes negative behavioral change, how much it is a force for separating, for othering, for moving people further apart from each other, for isolating. But I think if we have that understanding, then we must also understand that architecture is also a force for good. It's a force for drawing people together, and it's a force for positive social change as well. And I think that most cities, of course, maybe not to the degree that Johannesburg has it, but I think most cities around the world are also reflective of a kind of politics of separation or of othering in terms of how people are treated and how architecture shows its attitude towards humanity and society, but understanding that it's also a force for the opposite, that there are so many structures that have been integral to bringing people together or to facilitating discussion is very profound for me. And so I always think about situating my work in that realm, in that optimistic realm that is against an architecture of separation. But yes, I think viscerally being situated in a context that was so dictated by a certain kind of behavioral output or behavioral change, so to speak, and then thinking about behavioral change that is the antithesis to that has been very important for my practice.
So following on with that, with the behavioral change, I mean, creating behavioral change is at least as emotional as it is practical. Yet for many, the concept of having an emotional response to a product or a building doesn't oftentimes feel obvious. Sometimes it is, but not always. So Yves, going back to you, how do you consider the emotional response of your stakeholders in your design?
Well, thank you for the question. I think if I think about our process and how we often approach these new types of projects, these new types of products, these new territories that we go into, it often is about really looking around the corner, trying to understand how this new technology, how this new enabling service, for example, how is it going to appear in people's lives, and in a way that it is more easily adopted, in a way that it sort of comes into their lives without disruption, without creating this, disruption or distraction, for example. And so, for me, it's always about developing an empathy. But you can talk to people. We talk to a lot of people. We interview them. We research them. But often, the types of projects we work on don't already exist. It's just an idea. It's not something that people have experienced already. And so we have to.
Can you tell our audience a little bit about what you're doing with the big mass of plastic that's floating around the Pacific Ocean, and how you turned that into something that's positive? That, by the way, I want to get a pair. Where do I sign up? Can you tell everybody about your sunglasses?
Sure.
Me too.
That's a project with the Ocean Cleanup, which is an organization based in San Francisco and in Holland, which is, its goal is to clean up rivers that spew plastics into the ocean, and clean up the Pacific garbage patch, which is a large area in the Pacific that is a giant plastic gyre. And when I met with Boyan Slat, the founder, there was really this, the question was, what do we do with the plastic that we take out of the ocean? It is both symbolic, but also a way to solve the problem. And so we took this plastic, 100% of ocean plastic, turn it into a pair of sunglasses that are kind of beautiful, practical, functional, and in doing so, we proved the fact that what we consider trash, what we put into the ocean, is actually treasure. It actually is a functional material that can be reused, and you can do something. You can. It's a resource that we shouldn't put in the first place into the ocean. And so, while it's remedial, we're also looking for solutions for new materials, new circular processes, et cetera, that where you don't end up with all this plastic in the ocean. But this is a remedial project, and the more sunglasses that are sold, the more of the Pacific garbage patch gets cleaned. So currently, we have sold enough of these sunglasses to clean about half of the Pacific garbage patch.
That's amazing impact, and I understand also all the money from that goes back into the org, to the charity, to continue doing their work. I love it.
Exactly. It is, as you say, Susan, it is circular, which means that the more plastic we take out, the more sunglasses we can make, the more sunglasses we sell, the more cleanup we can do. And to answer your question from earlier, you just have to go to theoceancleanup.com and order them from there. And I can tell you they get there in a few days. So it makes for a great gift.
There we go.
Maybe a Father's Day gift.
There we go.
And
love it. And Sumayya, can I shift over to you on this? Because when I walked through your pavilion, all I felt was emotion, tucking around corners and feeling all the different sides and all those voices you've brought together. But how do you consider the emotional response of your stakeholders in your design, especially because you're doing it, it's not your home country. It's not Joburg, it's London.
Thanks, Susan. We have had a long process of research over the now the year, I think, that because the project's been extended as well. And I believe, I agree with Yves. Similarly, I think often the projects that we have in mind are not yet in the world. So when we say we're researching, it's not necessarily saying just ask people what they want and so on. I think that research is a lot deeper than that. And sometimes the stakeholders that we're working with, none of us have the language to be able to articulate the depth of the crises that we're all facing, or of the challenges that we have, or even of the conceptually rich worlds that are waiting to happen within each of us. I think that for me, it was important that emotion that you're talking about hopefully comes from being able to sit and absorb and listen to place deeply for a long time, and then work on being able to reflect that back. And for me, it wasn't so important that the pavilion has a didactic message about where all of these places are, or particular architectural references to various places the pavilion does reference, but rather that it draws on learning from the generosity of spaces that have held community over time, and in learning from small architectural gestures, whether they are porch steps, or thinking about sound systems and the ways that they were able to activate people and streets, or generous architectural gestures like a shade canopy in a market, or an unfurled surface for people to be able to share a meal across. I think thinking about those and then working to be able to reflect them back and make them a gesture for everyone to enjoy in the pavilion was important. But also, I think, just talking about stakeholders, as important as it was to fold London and to fold all of these various spaces into the pavilion, it also became really important to fold the pavilion back out into London. And so through this project, it's a pavilion that's conceived in 5 parts, and there are fragments of the pavilion situated in different neighborhoods and community institutions in London. And I think that is it's an attempt to start to think deeply about the social sustainability of a project like this, to think about what the impact beyond the life of the pavilion itself and beyond the physical structure can be. And for me, it's deeply honoring that there are these new seeds of collaboration between the Serpentine and these fragments that are placed across London through this project.
That's beautiful. It sounds like poetry when you speak. I want to thank Carlos for putting up the link to the sunglasses and the link to the Serpentine Pavilion. Run, don't walk. And there's new secrets and wonderful things coming out, layering on top of what Sumayya is talking about with her pavilion. I want to move on, though, about her experience with the Matrix feminist design cooperative in the 80s. Joss Boyce wrote in the FT that a feminist approach to architecture was all about changing processes rather than appearances, by reallocating knowledge and resources to those who are most underrepresented in and whose needs are not being met by conventional building development and design. So how does that resonate with you today, if at all? And this is to both of you, Yves, like, how do you feel that thinking about different stakeholders in design has evolved, especially in the context of social justice?
I think you should go ahead, Sumayya.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, I absolutely resonate with what Joss is saying, and I'm a huge fan of the work as well. I think everyone should look at it and read it deeply. I think that for me, this is something, thinking about different worldviews and the perspectives that all of us bring, is now more than ever it's really urgent and more important than ever. And I think thinking about Joss's words, thinking about our perspectives of difference, whether that is the geographical part of the world that we come from, whether it's our gender, our abilities, our physical abilities, thinking about differently abled bodies and so on, or our different cultural backgrounds and ethnicities. I think all of these diversities, age is another one, are lenses that we view the world through. And I think that these are more than just being able to have someone like myself in a position to be able to design something on a platform that has lots of visibility. It's important that we use the opportunities that we have to think about how things can look and be different from our perspective. Because I think so many of the challenges that we have in the world are because things are slanted in a particular worldview, and they have been for a really long time. So we need to be able to offer different answers to the challenges that we have. And I think that those definitely come from from the fact that we are different, and rather than only replacing bodies, rather than having, for example, more women being in high positions, being heads of justice or being CEOs and so on, it's important that, for example, in this example, that women also take on what that role means and use the lens of being a woman to start to think about how it can be structurally different beyond just being a face that's replaced something old and is perpetuating the same kind of politics. But I think that there's a lot of power in that. And I think, of course, it's an inspiration, and it's a way for us to think about challenges differently. And it's urgent that we think we have different solutions to the crises that we have. But beyond that, I think our lenses of difference also offer us such interesting conceptual ground. There's so much richness and so much texture in thinking from other ways of being that really needs to be brought out into the world. And I think there's huge opportunity and potential in that.
Absolutely. And I mean, you do say, you're an African architect, and really, you're bringing that to London right now, aren't you? You're manifesting that in your work. But I feel like you manifest that across all the projects. Like, there are a number of voices that you bring when you look at projects, when you approach your work. Okay, what I'd like to do is open up now to questions, and then we'll continue on with Sumayya's answer on that. But if you guys want to start sending me questions, please do. But Sumayya, please speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Susan, for the question. I think that there's something, if we think about different worldviews, and I think architecture is always an act of projection. Design is always propositional. It's always based in the future by its nature. But I think that there are certain ways of practice that are very much about being propositional from the get-go, when one lands or before one arrives. And there are others that are much more about negotiating, about dialogue, about listening, that I think are perhaps more resonant with being from my part of the world, being a woman, being younger, and so on. And I think that that's something that I would love to always be able to reflect and put at the forefront of my work, that it is very much about learning and negotiating place, rather than projecting from the get-go.
Wonderful.
Thank you for those enlightening answers, Sumayya. My sense of that, of the sort of role that we can play is really to be at the service. To be at the service of different types of communities, whether it's the young, the aging, people who are sick or have health issues. So much of our work ends up, really sort of discovering, learning, and humbly supporting, others, both in their sort of journey, their personal journey, and their use of products or services that we create. But also often in new places, like the work we've done for about 4 years with Spring, which is to support West African and South Asian entrepreneurs that are solving issues, or that are creating services and solving issues for adolescent girls, for example. Or the work we've done with New Story, which is 3D printing homes currently in a whole village in Mexico to solve homelessness. Essentially, people who make under $200 a month, and families who live in shacks. But with 3D printing, you can solve that. But are we just showing up and building something that was conceived in San Francisco. That's not the approach. What we do is we go into we visit the communities multiple times. We present different ideas and change them and transform them and adapt them. And this is where 3D printing is really unique, because you move 100 kilometers up and up and down in some of these developing countries, and you have a different climate or a different culture. Cooking is handled, outdoors or semi-indoor, outdoors or indoors, and that has to do with the culture. But having technologies and having design processes that make them highly adaptable to different needs, even an individual family's need, and being able to press a button and build that house, for that family or for that community, is really sort of a new way to think about design at the service of very different communities, both in here in the US or England, but also in the rest of the world.
Yves, to that, I want to follow up and talk a little bit about stakeholder capitalism, right? So it continues to gain interest and momentum across the private sector, resulting in movements like circularity, which we were talking about earlier as response to sustainability needs. But what insight would you give to entrepreneurs listening to this, designers or innovators, who are trying to consider how their product will impact key stakeholders?
Well, I think we're all trying to understand, a more circular way to approach new projects, new designs, new manufacturing opportunities. And it's been a long road, obviously, and it's going to be a long road ahead to get to true sustainability, to get to solutions, because we have a lot of embedded systems that just aren't changing. If you need to put cereal in a cereal box, there's only a few factories that do that, and they do it in a very conventional way. It takes years to change the process of manufacturing and delivering and the logistics of it all. That said, what I'm very excited about is additive manufacturing, because we're talking about 3D printing here, whether it's metal, whether it's plastic. And now we just launched a project where we are 3D printing wood. We're taking waste material from the production of paper and pulp, and turning it into objects. So you're essentially taking a resource that comes for free. So that should be interesting for any entrepreneur. And turning it into beautiful products, whether it's architectural elements, whether it's tabletop objects, whether it's furniture. And that comes from the 50% waste of cutting a tree. When you cut a tree and you want to turn it into something, whether it's furniture or architectural elements or accessories, home accessories or paper, you lose 50% of that material. So moving away from subtractive manufacturing and products, which is 99% of what's built today or what's made today, to additive, you really are potentially peering into a completely new world of how things are built and made, and changing the equation essentially from extracting and subtracting from what the earth produces for us to an additive approach. And I think that is the future, and that is the world we live in is a little bit depressing at times, because it's so hard to change the current systems to just replace one material to the other. But if you change the entire manufacturing process, specifically with additive and circular type of technologies, you're creating a new world.
Thank you so much for that advice. Thank you. And then I'm going to turn to you, and because that's actually something that the Serpentine Gallery has been leading on, is the whole sustainability agenda as one of our great galleries. here in the UK, but that's also something you considered with your pavilion, didn't you? I remember seeing some of the wood that was, or the kind of wood.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think on a physical level, of course, sustainability is incredibly important. Physical material sustainability, and the pavilion has a real interest in reclaim and reconfiguring. And so all the cork in the pavilion is repurposed from the wine industry. Our steel structure is from the contractor steel yard from their previous projects, and we've used sustainably sourced ply with micro cement. I think that the reports are telling us that it's a carbon negative pavilion, a carbon negative structure, which means that that's of course wonderful in terms of sustainability, and we should all be striving to build in that regard in bigger ways and on mass and on scale. But I think that for me, the social sustainability of the project is really important to consider as well. And I'm very honored and very lucky that the Serpentine has committed for at least the next 3 years to Support Structures for Support Structures, which is a program that I started to work on developing in response to COVID, where we're looking to support the bodies, some of the bodies at least, that are so generous as so I was thinking very much about the architectures of generosity that the pavilion is inspired by. But when COVID hit, we started to see all of these vulnerabilities and to realize really that these spaces are also so reliant on the generosity of so many bodies. And so I think the social sustainability, or thinking about broadly about social sustainability, it's important to think about how we deepen different networks in the arts and how we also work to support voices and bodies of difference who are coming at our challenges and our issues from entirely different perspectives. And so Support Structures for Support Structures is a fellowship program that is working to support individuals working and collectives working at the intersections of art and ecology, art and social justice, and art and the archive. And the idea really is that year on year, we will build on a network of people who are being supported not only in terms of money, but also in terms of workshops and in terms of mentorship programs and so on, that Amal Khalaf and the Serpentine Civic team is also holding institutionally at the moment. And I think that for me, that is something that is hopefully going to live well beyond the life of this project, but that came about through it. And I think thinking about projects going forward, it's important that we also understand one small project in relation to all of its layers and all of the broader impacts that it can have in terms of thinking about physical material, but also thinking about legacy as well.
And tell me, Sumayya, who's backing that for the Serpentine? Is that just coming out of the membership of the International Council, or is there a specific foundation that's backing that over these next few years?
I think so. Bettina and Hans Ulrich have been really instrumental in raising the funding, and I think it's coming from a mix of sources from within the Serpentine patron pool, but also from outside of it as well.
Fantastic. Well, I always am here to thank those kinds of partners to help push the change. And I also, just in closing, want to thank both of you individually and collectively on how you're doing that through architecture and design to create more impact on this planet. Thank you both.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Sumayya.
Thank you so much, Susan and Yves. Such a pleasure to be in conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think someone's going to come and end this, but if not, goodbye to all of our guests, and thank you for your time. Hello, Janet. There you are.
Profound words from Susan. Architecture is the physical act of social change. We need to rethink the utility of design and art in our work in the next 10 years, putting human behaviour at the centre. Thank you to Sumayya and Yves for explaining their role in the design of behavioural change, looking at things through different lenses and perspectives, looking at being at the service of different audiences, adopting a more circular approach through additive manufacturing and reclaimed materials. It's an opportunity and a responsibility. Yves, I will be taking up your offer to buy a Father's Day gift of some ocean cleanup sunglasses. And Sumayya, I can't wait to visit your pavilion at the Serpentine Gallery. Thank you to all of you for enriching our thinking this afternoon around architecture. I think the first on our stage in the past few days. So to everybody in the audience, we look forward to seeing you again at 5. Now we'll be looking at another way in which we can play for the planet. And in the interim, don't forget to visit the expo booths in the virtual expo. There's one in particular I'd like to plug, CreaTech Ones to Watch from the Creative Industries Council. See you all at 5.